Good morning, brothers and sisters in the Dhamma. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. Today's sharing is titled Taming the Roaming Mind. Now, what does that mean? Basically, this is the Buddha's warning. The untrained mind is subtle and elusive. It roams far and wide, alone, without support, proliferating wherever it chooses, perplexed by underlying tendencies. And what can we do about it? How can we pause the roaming, calm the turmoil, pacify the perplexity, and tame the underlying tendencies? Well, that is today's sharing. So let's begin. Very quickly, I'm just going to first look through some of Buddha's warnings about the wandering mind. Throughout the sutras, the Buddha has mentioned in several places, warned us about how the mind wanders. And today I'll just share with you a few of the most important reminders and warnings from the Buddhas about the wandering mind. We're also going to take a look at basically 4 categories of mind wandering, and this is relevant only to normal people, assuming people like you and I, not people who are having some psychological disorder or mental illness. So for normal people, I basically group them into 4 major categories of mind wandering. And then also we're going to examine one of the most important root causes of mind wandering, which is underlying affective tendencies. The Buddha spoke about this in many sutras, and in one of the sutras we're going to discuss this a little bit more. And we are also going to take findings from neuroscience to support what the Buddha taught us about the wandering mind, the underlying tendencies, okay? And finally, the most important thing, we are going to take a look at techniques and practices we can apply to help us tame this wandering mind. So that is the gist of today's sharing. Okay, first we'll begin by taking a look at a very important warning from the Buddha, from Dhammapada verse 36, where the Buddha said, difficult to comprehend, extremely subtle, the affective mind descends wherever it desires. The wise person guards his mind. A well-guarded mind brings happiness. So here the Buddha was talking about the affective mind. The affective mind is basically the part of the mind which is what we call emotional mind, because the Buddha used the word chitta. Now, throughout all the sutras, the Buddha used 2 words to refer to mental processes. When the Buddha used the word mano, he's referring to the thinking mind, the cognitive process, what psychologists call the cognitive process. When the Buddha used the word chitta, he's usually referring to the affective process, the part of the mind which we call emotional mind. Of course, chitta is sometimes also used as a generic term to refer to the mind as a whole, but very specifically in many sutras and Dhammapada verses, the word chitta specifically refers to the emotional mind, and that's what the Buddha is referring to here. So the key message here is that the emotional mind descends wherever it desires. That means the emotional mind, once something triggers it, it can go deep into various places. Going into the rabbit hole, like Alice in Wonderland and so on. And basically the Buddha's advice is that the wise person guards his mind, and a well-guarded mind brings happiness. Now I'm going to also highlight another verse, the next verse, Dhammapada verse 37, where the Buddha also reminded us, the affective mind roams far and wide, solitary and unsupported, formless, elusive and underlying. One who disciplines his mind is freed from Mara's bonds. Firstly, I'd just like to quickly point out, whenever Buddha refers to Mara's bonds. Usually the Buddha was referring to the fact that when we react to whatever is going on, our reactions are centered around lobha, dosa, moha. Lobha refers to the lust and greed towards something that is pleasant and pleasurable. Dosa refers to the anger and hatred towards something that is unpleasant, unpleasurable. And moha refers to our self-centered mind, our mind that is focused on existence. So it's basically the notion of existence, that is moha. So here the Buddha warns us that the mind is solitary, unsupported, meaning it's by itself, it has no guidance. Without guidance, of course, it goes all over the place. It is formless, elusive, and underlying, meaning that it is difficult to grasp. It is something which is sort of like very faint. It is not clear, not clear-cut. So it's very faint, elusive, and underlying means it's under the surface. So this emotional mind is happening under the surface. And that's what the Buddha is warning us. So if we learn to discipline our mind, we will then be able to free ourselves from Mara's bond of lobha, dosa, and moha. And I'm going to show you another very important warning from the Buddha, and I'm using Bhante Punnaji's translation here, where the Buddha stated in this Chitta Sutra, he said, emotions dominate the world. Emotion create distress, which is all kinds of mental suffering. Emotion is the one thing to which all are spellbound. That means when our emotional mind rises up, takes control, we are stuck, we are spellbound by it, we are trapped by our emotions. So this is very important warning to us, not to allow the emotional mind to take control of us. And here is another very important warning from Dhammapada verse number 42, where the Buddha stated, whatever harm one's enemy may do to one or a hater to another, one's ill-directed emotions inflict upon oneself a greater harm. That means it's your own ill-directed emotions that can hurt you far more than your enemy or someone who hates you. Because there's no end to how much these ill-directed emotions can really cause you a lot of pain and suffering. Now, what is this ill-directed emotions? Basically, this ill-directed emotions is referring to the way the mind runs off with mental proliferation. The mind roaming off with all kinds of thoughts rising from imagination, memory, and expectation. Imagination is trying to think about something in the future that hasn't happened yet. Memory is something to try to recall the past of something that is long gone. And expectation is trying to change what is already here and now, which is already happening. And we expect something different. So imagination, memory, expectation, they trigger this mental proliferation. And when that happens, we are under its spell. And that is what hurts us, continuously hurting us. In a nutshell, we're basically living in this sensual realm, the world around us, which we often call the physical world, the sensual realm. But I'm going to use Bhante Punnaji's statement here. We are not a body in a world. We are basically organisms in an environment. Because when we think ourselves as this body moving around in this world, it is an existential thinking. But the Buddha's teaching has always been experiential. So from an experiential perspective, we are organisms in an environment. And this organism has a body that is alive, and there's a process that keeps this body alive, life-sustaining process we call metabolism. Now, we also have 5 physical senses plus our mind. So there are 6 sensual realms. We are able to see, hear, smell, taste, and touch, and then cognize whatever we have experienced. All this is the process of panchakanda. So basically, we are organisms in an environment influenced by activities going on in the environment, and we are able to sense what's happening and experience the environment through our senses, our five physical senses, and also our sixth sensual realm of cognition and thinking. Okay, so when things are happening around us, there's many things that trigger some reaction in us. And things happening out there, we can call them stressors. The reaction happening inside us is stress. So things happening around us are called stressors. They trigger a stress reaction inside us. And we can basically categorize three major categories of stressors. Things happening around us that arouse our emotions, making us very emotional, making us feel something strongly. That is sometimes causing emotional trauma. And these negative emotions arising can hurt us. And this is when things happening around us trigger emotional trauma in us, arousing emotions, negative emotions. Not only that, things that are happening not according to our wishes, adversities, right? And adversities, when we encounter problems, threats, difficulties, obstructions, and all kinds of things that are not according to our wishes or expectations. And then they present themselves as some form of threats or conflict, threats to our well-being and conflict to our expectations. And this again causes a lot of suffering in us, adversities. And then, of course, some things happening around us that are unpredictable, uncertainties. So we have uncertainties happening around us, causing confusion, perplexity, and some are unexpected or unfamiliar things happening, events, and changes, confusions, perplexities, indecisiveness, and even boredom. So they cause a lot of suffering in us. So these are things happening that present themselves as stressors, and we react because of the stress reaction inside us. And the problem is we often react without thinking. We do something and try to fight against it, fight or flight. So we react immediately without thinking. And this is unmindful reactions. Now let's take a look at a simple flow chart of what is going on, okay? So things happening around us, we begin to experience it and we begin to think about it and we begin to perceive our circumstances, what's going on. And the way we perceive our circumstances, they may trigger emotional arousal. Or they may trigger adversities in our mind, thinking, oh, this is not what I wanted. Or they may become certain things that appear to be uncertain or uncertainties arising. So all these are stressors. And when stressors arise, they trigger stress reaction inside us. So what are stress reactions? Basically, the body is uncomfortable because of the stress hormones, and then the mind is disturbed because of the discomfort in the body, and the mind is now getting a little bit confused or thinking about something not according to what we really wanted, or our emotions are being aroused. So this causes a lot of mental disturbances. So stress is really physical suffering, which is bodily discomfort, and mental suffering, which is mental disturbances. And when that happens, they cause a lot of problems. Now, when we are stressed, when stressors arise and then we experience stress, underlying tendencies arise. And when they arise, they trigger the mind to go into some kind of mental proliferation. Now the mind runs away with all kinds of thoughts, unsystematic, unguided thoughts. So there is mental proliferation. I'm going to explain a little bit more about what are the four major types of mental proliferations in a moment. But basically, the mind is now being disturbed and starting to think of things not in a very helpful way, not in a wholesome or helpful way. So that is what mental proliferation is about. The problem with mental proliferation is that we don't understand how it arises and then we react to it. And the Buddha has warned us, difficult to comprehend, extremely subtle. The affective mind descends wherever it desires. So when the mind runs into mental proliferation, the mind goes all over the place. It descends wherever it desires, because this emotional mind, the affective mind, is being disturbed. Now when that happens, we have a tendency to react. React. And when we begin to react unmindfully, it causes a lot of problem. It triggers an emotional chain reaction, causing the mind to get out of control. Now we are really having severe mental suffering. And it also brings about a lot of physical suffering. So all this is all kinds of suffering: grief, lamentation, distress, depression, exhaustion. Sukha, parideva, dukkha, domanassa, and upayasa. What the Buddha explained as the 5 different ways we are suffering. So we got to do something about it, because the real problem is, if we don't do something about it, we tend to fall into all kinds of sickness. We end up with mental illnesses, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, psychological disorder, or our health gets affected, chronic illnesses and health issues arising. All that because of this mental proliferation. And this mental proliferation is the affective mind, the emotional mind, roaming far and wide. So let's take a look at how this affective mind is roaming far and wide. Basically, I'm summarizing here 4 major categories of mind wandering or mind roaming. This is only applicable to normal people like you and I, who are not experiencing mental illness or psychological disorders, or who are experiencing elderly diseases like dementia, Alzheimer's disease, and so on. So I'm talking about normal people. Their mind will wander in 4 major ways. First, it is triggered by anusaya, underlying affective tendencies, and then the mind goes into what is called mental proliferation. That means the mind begins to think of thoughts that are not wholesome, not healthy. And this kind of thinking is usually biased towards our emotions, affective bias, and sometimes even exaggeration of emotions, extreme emotional exaggerations. So this is caused by anusaya, which I will explain in a moment. The Buddha actually explained this very thoroughly, these underlying tendencies. Another kind of mental proliferation is cognitive distortions, what the cognitive psychologists call cognitive distortions, and the lay people call it thinking traps. That means the mind begins to make certain assumptions, certain generalizations, and misreading the circumstances, misrepresenting or misperceiving what's going on, and we begin to think very inaccurately what is happening to us. And this is a kind of mental disturbance also. Now, between the first and the second, between what is aroused by anusaya and what is cognitive distortions, there are basically a lot of overlaps. So in other words, many conditions that are triggered by anusaya actually are also found in cognitive distortions. They're overlapping, but there are some very specific to each, very specific. Now, these 2 are generally what happens to us when we are going through daily life. And when something happens, then we end up in this kind of mental proliferation with these 2 conditions. But there are 2 more which are a little bit unusual, or not unusual, a little bit different from these 2. First one here, number 3, is what we call default mode network. Now, this is something very interesting. Back in the 1980s, when modern technology has become very well developed and scientists have now perfected or improved on a machine called MRI and all kinds of equipment that can be used to scan the brain. So neuroscientists want to look at what is going on inside the brain when we are experiencing something. So they put a lot of people through these MRI machines and check them. So there is one group of scientists at that time who were saying that, okay, what happens to a person who is not focused on doing a task? That means now the mind is free, relaxed, resting. The mind is not now focusing on doing any specific task. The mind is just resting. It could be meditating, but here we're not talking about high-level meditator. It could be just or average people like us. And this can also refers to times that you and I, when we meditate, we also can experience this default mode network. So when they ask these people, just relax, don't focus on anything, you're not trying to solve a problem, just take it easy, relax, and then they put these people through MRI machine, try to see what's going on in the brain when people are relaxed. And they are thinking, oh, perhaps the brain is still and calm and composed. Oh no, lo and behold, when they put people through the MRI machine, when they are resting, there's a lot of activity going on. And all these activities are centered around self-referential narrative. That means keep thinking about the self. Who am I? Why am I here? How am I doing? Am I okay? Am I doing well? A lot of I, me, or mine thinking. And very much centered around the identity, centered around self-esteem, and centered around ego fixation. So when people are put through this MRI machine, when they are supposed to be resting, that is what the mind is going through, because after they come out of the machine, they go through a lengthy process of interviews to find out what was going through their mind, and this was the conclusion. And the scientists call this default mode network. That means when we are not focused on anything specifically or any task, by default, the mind goes into this state, default mode network, or DMN, okay? And then finally, the fourth one is when the mind is lost. It's called rumination. It's like Alice in Wonderland, going into all the rabbit holes, you know, diving into here and there, unsystematic, unguided, completely lost, repetitive, looping, restlessness in the mind. And the attention is unstable. It's not thinking about anything clearly. The mind is unable to think anything clearly. So this is all running around. Now, I'm not going to look at too much about the second and the third and the fourth one, default mode network and rumination. I'm going to take a look more at number 1 and 2, which is what is happening to most of us most of the time. And bear in mind, I'm referring to people like you and I who are not having some kind of mental illness or some kind of psychological disorder. So we are just going through normal life, and we end up with a lot of mental proliferation. Collectively, I group number 1 and 2 together as mental proliferation. The mind is running around, proliferating, okay? So we're going to treat the two categories as one group called mental proliferation. The root cause behind mental proliferation is these underlying affective tendencies arising that the Buddha taught us about. So what are underlying affective tendencies? The Buddha used the word anusaya to refer to it, and there are a few sutras that mention this, but specifically in Majjhima Nikaya 18, the Buddha very clearly explained this, and this is the Madhu Pindika Sutra, the Honey Bowl Sutra, describing there are 7 underlying affective tendencies. There are 7 types of anusaya arising, and when they arise, they cause the mind to go into all kinds of mental proliferation. And we're going to take a look at this sutra specifically covering this area of anusaya. There are also other things that are mentioned. We're not going to go into that. Okay, so the key issue is that when we perceive things going on around us, our circumstances, we begin to feel, oh, this is pleasant, this is unpleasant. So when we begin to experience feelings of pleasantness or unpleasantness, or neither pleasant nor unpleasant, it triggers the arising of this anusaya. And when they arise, they cause mental proliferation. Anusaya act as unconscious emotional conditioning. In other words, they're conditioning our mind to go into some form of emotional activity, and that is mental proliferation. And they condition our perception, that means the way we perceive what's going on, the way we interpret our circumstances. They also condition our thoughts, our thinking, our decisions, and our assumptions, our generalizations. And finally, also condition our intentions. What do we want to do next? How are we going to respond to this? What is our reaction to this? So anusaya really act as unconscious emotional conditioning that affect our perception, our thoughts, and our intentions. And because of that, we react unmindfully. And this reacting unmindfully is tanha. Now, the word tanha is often translated as craving, but the real meaning of tanha, as taught to me by Bhante Punnaji, the real meaning of tanha is really our reaction to whatever we have experienced. So this reaction can be craving if it is something pleasant or pleasurable. But if it is something unpleasant or causes displeasures, we react negatively. We want to fight against it. So that's not craving anymore, okay? And basically our reaction come in three forms, and these are what are called these are the three ways we react. With greed, lobha, dosa, moha. Greed, right? Lobha means lust and greed towards something pleasant. Dosa means our anger, ill will, aversion towards something that is unpleasant. And moha is our delusion of self-centered existence. We think that we exist. This is I, me, or mine. I am experiencing this. I don't like this. I want to fight against it. That I, me, or mine is very strong. So lobha, dosa, moha. These are what is known as the Mara's bonds. Right? And we got to learn how to train our mind to free ourselves from that. Let's take a look at the sutra very briefly. Majjhima Nikaya 18, I'm not going to go into this sutra in detail. This is Honeyball Sutra. It started off with a story where the Buddha from time to time returns to his hometown, Kapilavatthu. So Buddha from time to time returns to his hometown to visit his father, to visit his family and relatives, and also to go around the place and to talk to the people there. So one time he visited Kapilavatthu, and he was basically meditating or resting in the park. Along came this elderly man. Now, the story is that the commentary mentioned that this elderly man, Dandapani, is actually the grand uncle of Prince Siddhartha before he became enlightened. But of course today, or in this case, when the Buddha was there meeting Dandapani, the Buddha is no longer Prince Siddhartha. He's no longer the unenlightened being. He's now fully enlightened. But Dandapani is a proud man because he's an elderly man. Everybody respects him. He expects a lot of respect from everyone. So he is a bit of a proud man, a little bit arrogant in the way he talks and walks around. So he walks up to the Buddha, seeing the Buddha, he just said in very simple way, "What do you teach?" Well, maybe it's arrogant, but he just asked the Buddha, "What do you teach?" And of course, the Buddha responded, knowing that Dandapani asked a question. So the Buddha responded very peacefully that my teaching is not to come into conflict with anyone. In the world, I do not have any attachment to sensual pleasures, nor do I argue with anyone. I have no concern for existence nor non-existence. I have no emotional reaction to sensations, and I'm not concerned with what is perceived. After the Buddha basically explained a few of these things, Dandapani just looked at the Buddha in perhaps in a proud or arrogant way, shook his head, made some funny sounds with the mouth, like that, whatever, turned around and just walked away. So it was not a very pleasant reaction from Dandapani. Well, whatever happened, Then that evening, the Buddha then went to his chambers and meditated. When he rose from his meditation that evening, he came out of his meditation and then he saw he was surrounded by a lot of young monks waiting for his teaching. So every evening, the Buddha gives some form of discourse, some form of teaching. So they surrounded him. The Buddha did not want to say too much, so he basically briefly told people what had transpired. And he told people he told the monks, young monks, his encounter with Dandapani. And concluding that, he summarized it with this statement here. In whatever way a person recognizes something by classifying it or labeling it, it is in this way that past experiences begin to affect future behavior unconsciously. So the Buddha was actually pointing out that whatever we see, hear, smell, taste, or touch, we have a tendency to classify them or give labels to them. And in this case, the Buddha highlighted this term, papancha sanya sanka. Basically, it means that everything that we experience, that we perceive, we begin to put them into a category, we generalize them, we give it label, right? So this is really what is going on. And this is what the Buddha was saying, papancha sanya sanka. Okay. Now, I'll give you a simple example, right? So let me show you this. What is this? Everybody, what is this? Mouse. You said mouse. Anything else? It's a computer mouse. Okay, good. Now, the funny thing is, I only bought this mouse very recently, and I'm bringing it here to BGF for the first time. So all of you are seeing this mouse for the first time or seeing this object for the first time. Why did you call it a mouse? Why do you give it a label mouse? That's because you have had past experiences. You have in the past seen many different versions of mouse that look similar to this. So when they look very similar to this, you call them mouse, and that is classifying them, giving it a label. The label is mouse, classifying them into the same category. Because, this is the first time you're seeing this, and yet you are able to say what it is because you have seen something similar from your past experiences, and now you generalize it and classify it and label it with the term mouse. We go through life in the same way. Everything we see, hear, smell, taste, or touch, we have a tendency to classify and label them. And when we begin to classify and label them and group them into certain categories, these categories are called sanka. Sanka means categorization or categories. So when we begin to classify what we perceive into categories, it triggers the arising of underlying tendencies. Well, the Buddha did not explain this to that extent. The Buddha just mentioned papancha, sanya, sanka, and then the Buddha left, went back into his chambers. Now all the young monks, having heard what the Buddha just mentioned, they are a little bit perplexed. So they wanted to find out more. So they went to seek the help of Mahakachana. And during those times, now a lot of people know, of course, Sariputta and Mahamoggallana as the chief disciple of the Buddha. But not only those two, the Buddha also has quite a number of enlightened monks, arahant monks, who are helping him to teach. So a lot of these enlightened monks are helping the Buddha to teach. And one of them is Mahakachana, very knowledgeable monk who teaches a lot. And of course, there are also Mahakassapa, and there's Anuradha, and several others, okay? And they are also helping the Buddha to teach. So now the young monks are a little bit perplexed. They want to know a bit more about what this is all about. They went to seek the advice of Mahakachana. And then Mahakachana went on to explain to them what is going on. And I just summarize it basically. Mahakachana basically pointed out that there are 7 unconscious tendencies, anusaya, that condition the thoughts, that shape our beliefs and opinions, and influence our intentions and actions, which then lead to disagreements, conflicts, and all kinds of arguments. That means there are 7 underlying tendencies. When they arise, they disturb our thinking. They disturb our beliefs and understanding, our opinions and our judgment. And when that happens, it affects our intentions and our actions and causes all kinds of disagreement and conflict. So what are these 7 anusaya? Now, I'm not going to read out the Pali term. I'm not good at pronouncing the Pali term. I'll just read out the English version. The first one has to do with passion and greed arising. They arise unconsciously. You're not aware of it arising. They just come from under the surface because they are called underlying affective tendencies. Now they rise up. Okay, passion and greed arising. And then, now passion and greed arising is because of something pleasant that we experience. If it is something unpleasant that we have experienced, then it will be ill will and hatred arising. Anger, ill will, hatred arising over something that is unpleasant. Then of course there are views and beliefs arising unconsciously, right? So it affects our opinions, our views and beliefs, and our judgments. And there's also vacillation and perplexity arising unconsciously. And this means the mind is now getting all confused and having doubts of all kinds, vichikicha, okay? Then there's also ego and conceit arising, self-centeredness, I, me, or mine, right? Focusing on the self, I, me, or mine, ego and conceit arising unconsciously. And of course, then delusion of existence arising unconsciously. Finally, also ignorance, avidya, and unknowing, not knowing, and then we begin to make all kinds of assumptions because we don't really know what's going on. So all these are 7 different tendencies, underlying tendencies. They are unconscious. They are affective. That means they trigger our emotions. When they arise, they trigger the mind to go into various mental proliferation. Okay? And then we react. And the reaction is usually centered around lobha, dosa, or moha. Lobha is basically the passion, lust, and greed towards something that is pleasant. Dosa is our ill will, hatred, and anger towards something that is unpleasant. And moha is our unknowing and ignorance and delusion of self-centered existence. Right? And these are what are commonly known as Mara's bonds. Okay? Okay, let's now take a look at Bhante Punnaji's explanation of what is anusaya.
Anusaya really means, saya means sleeping. Anusaya means sleeping. That means, what is the meaning of sleeping? This is what Sigmund Freud called repression. That means people begin to forget things, and once it is forgotten, you don't even know that you are having certain things. You are not aware of it. And that kind of sleeping is what is called repression. And so, what is called psychoanalysis of Sigmund Freud was to bring out these hidden, repressed things, bring it out and to become aware of it. What is unconscious is made conscious. So to make the unconscious conscious is what the Buddha, what the Sigmund Freud did, and that is what the Buddha did also, ultimately. to make the unconscious conscious. That unconsciousness is what is called avidya. And so, our mind is normally in an unconscious state. Most of the time, although we think we are conscious, most of the time we are acting unconsciously. This is the point. And this is why Sigmund Freud used the analogy of the iceberg. When the iceberg is kept in the water, it's like a piece of ice you put in the water, it begins to float. What is out of the water is only a small piece, the rest is inside the water. So in the same way, our mind, when we say we are conscious, we are only a small piece is conscious. The rest is all happening unconsciously.
All right, Bhante mentioned about sleeping. Now, he wasn't talking about us going to sleep. It's basically talking about something that is underlying, under the surface, something which is laying low, okay, dormant. So it's below the surface, underlying. Okay, and that's what he really meant when he used the word sleeping, underlying. And whenever we experience something unpleasant, traumatic experience, distressing experience, any pleasant or unpleasant experience, especially unpleasant experience, right? They disturb our mind. And we often say, let's just push it aside, you know. So this idea, when something disturbs our mind and we say, never mind, put it aside, this is called repression. Repression is different from suppression. You know, when you have negative thoughts arising, something disturbing your mind, and you want to force it away, stop. That is suppression. You're trying to suppress. Now, when you have negative thoughts arising and when you try to suppress them, they fight back and it makes it worse. The suffering gets worse. Many of us say, never mind, let it go. Letting it go is a way of responding we call repression. So when we say, never mind, they don't go away. They become some form of memory. And if we keep thinking about that, they become long-term memory. Otherwise, they are just short-term memory initially. So when you let it go and you don't think about it, it doesn't come back to haunt you. But if you keep reminding yourself about it, it becomes long-term memory. So whatever it is, even if we put it aside, let it go, they actually become some kind of memory. So repressed memories, they're called repressed memories. Repressed memories, they will arise unknowingly and then unexpectedly also from time to time. And this is without our choosing, without even our knowledge. They arise, and when these memories arise, they begin to influence our thinking, our perceptions, and our decisions. This is really anusayam arising. So when these repressed memories manifest as some kind of anusayam, some kind of affective underlying tendencies, and they become our unconscious emotional bias. And because of that, they trigger mental proliferation. So this is really a very important thing we have to realize. It is this anusayam. And whenever something happens to us, even if we try to push it away, it becomes some kind of memory. Of course, if we don't keep thinking about it, it may gradually fade. But very often we remind ourselves, yesterday this thing happened to me, I'm very upset. Very often we recall them, and that makes it worse. So now let's take a look at this conscious and unconscious thinking, okay? So our mind is like an iceberg floating on the surface. A small part of it is above the water, and the large part of it is underneath. What is above the water is what we call conscious. What is below is called unconscious. So conscious thoughts are thoughts in the present moment awareness. understanding what's going on, clear comprehension, and realizing what is happening, discernment, and paying attention to it with some wisdom, logic, 1 + 1 = 2, critical thinking, willpower, aspiration, intentions, decisions. These are conscious thoughts. But then under the surface is a whole lot of unconscious thoughts. Our perception, our interpretation of what has happened, right? The way we imagine things to be, our opinion, judgment, needs, wants, and a whole lot of things, right? Various habitual reactions even. Imagination, memory, expectations, they all are underlying. Even our past mental proliferations can remind us, okay? So all these underlying thoughts become some kind of affective tendencies. And these underlying affective tendencies, or the Buddha called it anusaya, when they rise up, they trigger mental proliferation. The mind gets disturbed. So the conscious mind is now disturbed by mental proliferation because of the rising of underlying affective tendencies. Now, that itself is not the big problem. The real big problem is we have a tendency to react. And how do we react? We react to all these disturbances with lobha, dosa, moha, Mara's bonds, okay? That means if it is something pleasant, we react with lust and greed. If it is something unpleasant, we react with anger and ill will. If it is something neither pleasant nor unpleasant, we become very self-centered. We react with notion of self-centered existence. And all this reaction lead to all kinds of suffering. Soka, parideva, dukkha, domanassa, upayasa. Right? The various forms of suffering that the Buddha warned us about. So reacting is one of the biggest causes of suffering. Now, let's take a look at science. Let science explain. Now, we have findings from neuroscience that support to some degree what about these underlying tendencies arising, okay? So now let's take our mind off the Dhamma for a moment and think in scientific way. So now bring out the genius in you. Bring out the genius from within and look at this scientifically, okay? Now there's a very famous scientist in the 1980s, 1990s, then he passed away some years ago, by the name of Dr. Benjamin Libet. He conducted a series of experiments, but of course, he uses the word free will experiment. I'll explain why I don't agree with the term free will, but we'll come to that in a moment. Basically, he calls them free will experiment. So if you want to find out more about these experiments online, by all means, you can Google free will experiment. You Google the name Benjamin Libet, you find quite a bit of information. And it shows how the brain already started preparing for an action even before we consciously make a decision to act. That means if we want to think of doing something, even before we make that decision, the brain has already a lot of activities going on before that drives us to make a decision. So there's something underlying, behind the scene, going on with every decision. In other words, now the experiment is this. Benjamin Libet get people to say, okay, here's the button. Just keep your mind relaxed, and then now, at any moment you feel like it, you want to press the button, you say to yourself, I want to press the button, and then press the button. And then they measure the moment you have the thought, right? The moment you have the thought, and then you press the button, and then there's a brain scan, scanning what goes on in the brain long before you press the button, what's going on. Okay, so this is what the experiment is about. So what we experience as I decide to do this, or I decide to press the button, may actually come after unconscious brain activity going on that already began this decision-making process. This is That means something is happening behind the scene before you even make the decision to want to do that, okay? So let's take a look at a brief explanation of Benjamin Libet's free will experiment.
Did you know that best argument against free will is Libet experiment, conducted by Benjamin Libet in the 1980s? In this experiment, participants were asked to perform a simple voluntary action, such as pressing a button, while their brain activity was monitored using an electroencephalogram or EEG. They were also asked to note the exact moment they felt the conscious intention to act. Libet discovered that there was a consistent readiness potential, a specific pattern of brain activity that occurred several hundred milliseconds before participants reported feeling the conscious decision to act. This suggested that the brain had already initiated the action before the person became aware of their decision. Does this mean the decision was already made? The Libet experiment has inspired further research into the neuroscience of decision-making, such as studies by John Dylan Haynes using fMRI, which also found that brain activity can predict decisions seconds before conscious awareness.
So in Benjamin Libet's experiment, the subjects are watching a clock on the screen and then make a conscious decision at any moment. Oh, I want to press the button, right? And the subject then note at what point of the clock, at what point he made the decision, and then he pressed the button. Because the computer cannot know when you made the decision. So you have to figure out that moment you made the decision, at what point in the clock. And then you key in the time. And then you press the button, right? Subject presses the button and records the moment the conscious decision was made. And this is repeated many, many times to get an average reading. And there's a EEG connected to the scalp, basically sensing what goes on in your brain and continuously measures your brain activity in the motor area. That means specifically in the area of the brain that drives your finger to move. Not anywhere else, because you could be thinking about other things, but that particular part of the brain, the motor area of the brain that drives your finger to move. And they are measuring activity going on there. So let's take a look at the experiment.
As I do this over and over again, a clear pattern starts to emerge.
So here are our results, which contain the same basic effect as Libet originally found. The average time of the intention to move was where this arrow is here. And you can see that the motor areas of the brain have begun to build up electrical activity in preparation for this willed action 2,000 milliseconds at least before the action actually occurs.
Just as in Libet's original work, this experiment seems to show that my brain begins to prepare for movement long before I felt like I had consciously decided to move. So did I have any real choice about when I moved? Could the feeling of having made a decision just be an illusion?
So this looks like a real problem for our idea of conscious free will, because our assumption that we work with every day, I think, is that we decide what we want to do, and then, or I should say, I decide what I want to do, and then I am able to get my brain to drive my body to make it happen.
Now, this diagram here shows the activity going on. So the brain activity as well as the moment the person decides to press. So that is the moment, like the subject made a conscious decision to press the button. And then, of course, follow the actual action of pressing. But there is EEG sensing. That means the brain is now, they're sensing what goes on in the brain, the part of the brain that is associated with the finger movement of pressing the button, the motor area of the brain, okay? And they found that at the time a decision was made, several seconds before the decision was made, there is this build-up of brain activity. Now, this particular subject in this case is, I forgot her real name, but she has appeared in many of BBC documentary. This documentary came from BBC. She appeared in many BBC documentary, and she herself has a PhD in psychology. So she's actually a very well-known scientist herself and very highly educated. But despite all that, the reading shows that up to 2 or 3 seconds before she made a conscious decision to press a button, the motor area of the brain that drives the finger to press the button has already started. 2 to 3 seconds. Now, when they did this experiment to average people like you and me, the average person, and this time lapse backwards can go as much as 8 to 10 seconds. So for the average person, it could be as much as 8 to 10 seconds before you make a decision to move. Your brain connected with the movement has already activated. And something is underlying that has already arisen up, right, before you even know that you are making a decision to do that. That's really what is concluded here. And this is the unconscious mental tendencies. Now, scientists call this readiness potential. The readiness potential. Okay? So, the underlying unconscious thoughts arising several seconds before we seem to make a conscious decision to act. Do we really have free will to act? Or are thoughts and intentions conditioned by subconscious processes? Let's listen to what the scientists are saying.
The implications of Libet's findings are far-reaching. That our conscious mind, our free will, is merely an after-effect. The actions and decisions we take every day, which feel like instant conscious choices, are actually the result of slowly emerging subconscious processes in the brain. If everything really starts in the subconscious, do we have any freedom? Or are we sophisticated machines, our responses determined by the mechanics of our brains?
Now, findings from this experiment. Libet's experiment reveals our conscious decisions to act begin with unconscious mental tendencies arising before we are consciously aware of the decision to act. And the conclusion is that these underlying tendencies, what the scientists call action preparation processes or action preparation potential, condition our thoughts and our intentions to act. And neuroscience proves that our untrained mind is not really that pure after all during decision making. There's a lot of underlying tendencies that prevail. So we think we have pure mind, but actually without proper training, our untrained mind is not pure at all. There's a lot of underlying tendencies driving the way we think and the way we decide. Okay? So when underlying tendencies interfere with free thought, we really have the freedom to choose our response. So while underlying tendencies may interfere with our freedom to think, right, we do have the freedom to choose how we respond to what happens next. So this ability to choose our response, we have the freedom to do that. It's just that sometimes when we want to decide to act, there is some underlying tendencies disturbing our thinking. But whatever happens next, we do have the freedom to choose how to respond. Now, all that points to one form of mental proliferation. Now we look at a second form of mental proliferation, which scientists or psychologists call cognitive distortions. This is based on very extensive work done by a number of cognitive psychologists, amongst them Aaron Beck, Albert Ellis, and several others who have done a lot of research in cognitive psychology about cognitive distortions. Cognitive distortions basically refer to the way our mind begin to generalize or make assumptions or misunderstand or misread our circumstances. Therefore, the mind is now skewed and thinking in a certain way. Now, I won't go into details. I'll just roughly point out to one or two of them. Let's say we look at number one, mind reading, jumping to conclusion. When something happens, we have a tendency to imagine what could come next. We imagine what others are thinking about us. Right? So in other words, we have this mind reading or imagination thing, jumping to conclusion. When something happens, we begin to assume what you are thinking about me. So when somebody says something to me, I begin to assume what that person really means. Right? But actually, I'm jumping to conclusion. And there could be also a few others like fortune telling. When something happens, we begin to predict what could happen next. We may have a tendency to do that. Right? And then we start to respond to the situation based on our prediction, not based on what has transpired, but based on our prediction what could happen next. So all this is affecting our behavior. Now, I won't go into all of them. There are quite a number. I can show you here, list of them, the 21 of them. You can download this list. I'll give you the link at the end of today's sharing, and then you can download the list, 4 pages of them, and then you can see. Now, you can use this to help you. Not everything applies to everyone. Some of these we don't come across, but some of them are predominant in the way we think. So what I want you to do to help yourself, you read through this list and then look at each one and think about it. Am I like that? Do I do this? Is this happening to me frequently? That will help you. If you understand what is happening to you frequently, you will be able to learn how to tame it and calm it and reduce the effects it has on you. So I leave it to you to use this list. And basically, cognitive distortions arise because of generalizations, assumptions, misreading of circumstances, misinterpreting what's going on. Okay. Now, these unconscious repressed memories, when they arise, they manifest as thoughts at any moment without our choosing, knowing, and control. They come and they go. Thoughts arising like that, they are like clouds in the sky. They come and they go. They don't take on any form. This is anicca. And they lead us to experience lust, fear, anger, hatred, all kinds of emotional feelings. And they lead to stress, suffering. Right? If we allow them to persist, we get hurt by it. And it becomes very painful and it becomes very stressful and hurting. That's dukkha. And now, thoughts really are passing all the time. They are like visitors. They come and they go. They don't define who we are. But we have a tendency to cling on to them and say, I am thinking like that. This is me. No, we cling on to it. We identify ourselves with the thoughts that arise. No, not necessarily. Because thoughts are impersonal. Anatta. So basically life is anicca, dukkha, anatta. While we don't have free thought in this case, thoughts are influenced by underlying tendencies. We have no control over when and how these unconscious tendencies arise. We have the freedom to choose our responses. And this is what we're going to talk about today. How we can help ourselves to tame this roaming mind by learning to choose our response. So the solution, basically, repressed memories or underlying affective tendencies may arise any moment to trigger impulsive or unmindful reactions from us. But if we practice moment-to-moment mindfulness, mindful awareness of our perceptions, our thoughts, and our intentions, we now have the power, we have gained control and power to determine our response. So the first thing is to learn to be mindful and train our minds to maintain conscious moment-to-moment awareness of our circumstances. This moment-to-moment awareness is sati, attention. Be consciously attentive to moment our circumstances. And understand what's going on. Clear comprehension of our circumstances. What is really happening. If you pay attention and understand what's going on, you have clear comprehension, sampajana. And when you are able to understand what's going on, you can now formulate good responses. Apply wise attention to our decision to respond. And this wise attention is yoniso manasikara. And there you have it, the three very powerful training that the Buddha has been reminding us of. Sati, sampajana, yoniso manasikara. And Bhattacharya has explained this also, that we train our mind, and that training process is called bhavana. Bhavana often translated as meditation, but actually it is mind training, okay? Meditation is just a word, generic word people use, but more specifically it's mind training. So here I'm using Bhattacharya's word. He says, it is by being conscious all the time that we can control our emotions. The constant practice of being conscious is what the Buddha called development of the mind, or bhavana. So it's mind training. And being conscious, Bhattacharya really refers to the practice of sati, sampajana, and yoniso manasikara. And the meditation practice that can help us is satipatthana. Now, satipatthana is always translated as mindfulness. Now, mindfulness actually, if you just think of the word mindfulness, what does it mean? It's not so clear. But if you take the word satipatthana, and here, this is what Bhattacharya did, and you break it down to the root words, and you begin to understand what it really means. Satipatthana comes from three root words: sati, upa, and tana. Sati is attention. Upa is inwards, within, right? Within. And tana is to place or to focus or to position. So basically to place attention within. And a more accurate word to this phrase is to place attention within is introspection. Coming from two root words, introspection. Intro means inwards. Spection is inspection, examining. Okay, so place attention within and examining what goes on inside us. Only by examining what goes on inside us can we now take control of how we want to respond to what goes on outside. Okay. Now, I'm going to share with you, I'm not going to talk about meditation because that can take too long and a lot of details involved. I'll just share with you in a mindfulness in a daily practice, day to day, moment to moment, how we can practice mindfulness. And this is based on techniques that I have developed and have been applying and used in my seminars, my mental health seminars in the prisons. And I have conducted hundreds of these seminars already, at least more than 100 of these seminars in a couple of prisons in the Philippines. And thousands of prison inmates have attended and benefited from it. So what I'm sharing here is basically, in a nutshell, something that I have developed and applied and successfully used to help people to overcome their mental health problems in the prison. And so when we perceive circumstances around us in our environment, it is very important to pay attention, bring our attention on really what's going on inside, how they affect us. Not worry too much about what goes on outside because we can't change. Most of the time, we cannot change what goes on outside. We may be able to influence people around us to help to change the way they respond, but that is not easy to do. And that doesn't happen all the time. We may be able to influence people, but we can't change how they behave. But what we can change is how we experience it and how we respond to it. And that's what we are focusing on. Pay attention, be introspective inwards, and observe how it is affecting us. Everything that happens around us can affect us physically. So be attentive, right? So this is the present moment awareness. And how it is affecting us is understanding what is going on. Sampajana, clear comprehension. So when we bring our attention inwards, we are now observing how the body is affected. Stress hormones being released all over the place. Now our body is all tensed up, all stressed. So this tension and stress is going on inside us. So realize we have bodily stress. And with bodily stress, we also feel something about it. We have sensations about it. Something pleasant, unpleasant, agitation, discomfort, and various forms of sensations that we are experiencing. And then all these physical experiences disturb our mind, trigger emotions arising, arousing emotional reactions, mental disturbances, and then our thoughts arise. We have concepts and perceptions, and we begin to have intentions. So these are the things that's happening inside. Learn to be able to comprehend this is happening. Having firstly present moment awareness with sati, now clear comprehension that this is happening, sampajana. When we are able to do that, then we are able to take control of our response. This is in fact the practice of satipatthana. The first is kayanupassana, the second one is vedananupassana, the third one is chittanupassana, and the fourth one is dhammanupassana. This is satipatthana in practice. So learning to practice the satipatthana meditation can help you understand this more deeply. And then what do? Be aware, be conscious of this vicious cycle of emotions. Be wary of it. Realize that vicious cycle of emotions can arise and disturb us and cause us to react unmindfully. If we are aware of that, we can learn to respond positively. And how do we respond positively? Learn to relax. Do not react unmindfully. Refrain from judgment and focus on relaxation. And when you're able to do that, there is a technique called pause, relax, and introspect. Or pause, relax, and think. I'm going to explain that in a moment. But basically, be conscious and be wary of vicious cycle of emotions arising. Learn to relax and do not react unmindfully, and refrain from judgment. Focus on relaxation. When you do that, you are practicing yoniso manasikara, okay? Discernment with wise attention. Now that pause, relax, and think is a 3-step self-compassion practice that I teach people. How we can put mindfulness in action in actual way. When something happens around us, pause, do not react. Our tendency is to react without thinking. No, pause. Because your body is now disturbed, your mind is disturbed. So allow time for your emotional excitement and your anxiety to calm down. Allow time for your stress hormones to subside, because your body is now flooded with stress hormone and your mind is now disturbed with a lot of anxiety and a lot of excitement. So pause, do not react. And not only that, help it along by consciously relaxing. So this pause, pause, do not react is sati, attention to present moment awareness. And then relax. Take a deep breath and relax the body. When you're able to relax the body, you're able to consciously calm the mind, compose the mind. When the mind is adequately composed, you are now in a position to respond wisely. So now this second step is relax, understand that your body is stressed, now you need to relax. And this understanding is sampajana, clear comprehension that you need to relax. And when you're able to relax, then you're able to think of how to respond. Think, introspect. Purposefully now focus on helpful and beneficial response to the problem. And this is the yoniso manasikara. Now you are using wise attention to decide how you're going to respond to the problem. Right? So pause, do not react, that is sati. Relax, allow the mind to calm down, that is sampajana. And then think so that you can find helpful and beneficial way to respond, that is yoniso manasikara. And now what happens in the vicious cycle of emotions when we do that? You see, normally without doing that, we are reacting unmindfully. And when we react unmindfully, it triggers this emotional chain reaction, bringing all kinds of suffering. The problem is mental proliferation. Pause, relax, and introspect. With sati sampajana and yoniso manasikara, we will be able to bring our mind to the present moment. And this is what the Buddha taught us. The wise person guards his mind. A well-guarded mind brings happiness. Okay? So you have to train yourself to guard your mind. When something happens, hurting you, pause, do not react, and then bring your attention inwards. That will calm the body. Now your body is relaxed, bodily comfort, and your mind is composed and calm. When that happens, you are transforming vicious cycle of emotions into virtuous cycle of composure. You are now experiencing virtuous cycle of composure. Okay? When you pause, relax, and introspect. And that's what Bhante was reminding us about. It is by being conscious all the time that we can control our emotions. The constant practice of being conscious is what the Buddha called development of the mind. So learn to pause, relax, and introspect. Now, how does that affect our conscious and unconscious mind? If we are not doing that, right, we have a lot of underlying tendencies arising, disturbing the mind with mental proliferations. And when we learn to take control of that, we can help ourselves. And that's what the Buddha was reminding us. One who disciplines his mind is freed from Mara's bonds. Pause, relax, and think. With sati, sampajana, and yoniso manasikara. So when you apply pause, relax, and think, you learn to stop these underlying things happening, and then they don't disturb you anymore. Okay? So we are reminded by Bhante's explanations. So I'll just summarize very quickly. Mindfulness in daily life is about bringing attention inwards and realizing how it is affecting the body and the mind, and learn to relax and focus on relaxation and be able to respond with clear intentions. And I hope this has been helpful to help you practice sati sampajana and yoniso manasikara. Okay, thank you very much for your attention. This pause, relax, and think are very simple practices. Anybody can learn to practice them. And finishing off, basically we are reminded the wise person guards his mind. A well-guarded mind brings happiness. One who disciplines his mind is freed from Mara's bonds. So with this, I end my sharing. Here are the links. You can download the slides for today, and also the list of cognitive distortions. Thank you very much. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.